This is part 5 of my multi-part series on how to fix a dent. You know, if you haven't seen the other parts in this series, I highly recommend you watch those before you follow this video. If you want the updates on this series, I highly recommend you subscribe to my channel, and then you'll get notification when the next parts are available for viewing. And I don't know how many parts this is going to be. It could be a very long series. It all depends on how well it's received and the interest it generates. So we're sitting here now and we're ready to go to work. Finally, we're ready to do some real work on getting this fender ready to fill with some body filler. What we're going to focus on in this particular video is how to prep this area properly for the application of body filler. And you might say, well, you know, you can show us that in 30 seconds. Well, not necessarily so. For the amount of body work failure I've seen over the years, a lot of people fail in the area of preparation. Okay, it's not in the paint, it's not in the application of the Bondo, it's in the preparation of the metal before they apply the Bondo, and there's a lot of things that could go awry. So here's what I've done. Okay, I've already covered up the engine compartment with plastic, and I'm going to be creating a lot of dust. I'm in the shop here. I normally don't do it in here, but this is the best place to film. So I've at least covered up the car and the engine compartment. I've also prepared myself with a little dust collector. Okay, this can work pretty well in confined spaces if you're not generating a lot of dust. This is a box fan with a furnace filler on the back side. So I'm going to get this right up next to the dent while I'm sanding. And a lot of the dust is going to get sucked right in this furnace filler. That'll keep the dust from going all over my shop. Because let me tell you, auto body filler dust can be some of the worst, some of the finest dust, and it just gets everywhere. Once again, you don't want to be breathing it down the road. So I will make every effort I can to see if I can, collect as much dust while I'm going through the sanding process and the grinding process. Okay. We're going to have to remove the old paint. The paint is badly chipped. There's a few little rust spots down in here from this sitting. So there's a couple different ways you can do that. I'm going to be using an air sander like you see here. This is an air sander with a 36 grit disc on it. And if you don't have an air sander, or you can use a drill, by the way, and get a little attachment for sandpaper. You can do this by hand, by the way. You can get a sanding block like this sanding block here, and we can, we can scrub away on this and eventually get all this old paint off. But, I'm old. I don't like to scrub that much, so I'm going to use power. But I know a lot of you won't have, a lot of power equipment. So what I've tried to do in this video is geared it and show you some options for some simple and inexpensive tools. You also are going to need masking tape. You're going to need a Sharpie marker. I've got here a little center punch and a little ball peen hammer. Now, if you've got a set of body tools, you're going to want the little pick hammer, okay? But a lot of people don't have the pick hammer. And it can be substituted for small dents like this with a nice sharp center punch and a small hammer like you see here. The other things I'm going to have is this little tool right here. This is a rather stiff wire brush on a drill, and I'm going to be using it on the edge of the fender. Remember, the edge of this fender got pretty deformed. If you watch part 1 and see what I had to start with, it was badly damaged. And so to get in here and grind all this old paint and get these little spots of rust out here, if I apply a sanding disc to this and grind away on this edge, I can really make that edge thin, and I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do to prep this edge here is I'm going to use a stiff wire brush on a drill. And then finally, once again, get the dust. We're only going to be grinding here, so I've got my dust mask and my face shield. All right, now let's take a closer look at this, and I'll show you how I actually get this fender area ready for grinding the old paint off. The first thing I'm going to do is a final inspection of this damaged area, and I'm going to be particularly looking for any high spots. Anytime you're repairing a dent like this, you do not want high spots of metal. They tend to break through the auto body filler, and they raise havoc with the work you're doing. So it's always very important to make sure. Now this is a little bit of an art form here. You've got to kind of run your hand, and here's the undamaged area here. I'm going to run my hand, and you can kind of feel it. Okay, if you feel a little, maybe a little bump that's out here, like there, like right there, I can use, you know, once again I use a pick hammer. I can use this punch. In some ways the punch is more accurate. I come right on the top of that little high spot, and I'm just going to give this a couple of wraps. I only need one wrap. Look at that. I don't think you can see it, but it literally, using a good wrap on the center punch, it pulled that little nub inward without affecting the rest of the area. So okay, if I'm pretty satisfied now that there's no high spots, I'm going to next use a Sharpie marker, and I'm going to mark the extent of the area that I'm going to fill. Now, the way I do body work, I'm sure there's other ways to do this, but I like to use the original paint and the original fender as a guideline when I'm sanding. In other words, if right here is the line, okay? Okay, there's a little bit of damage right here. I'm not going to get too close, but maybe I'll come a little bit closer, right in there. Okay, I'm going to start right there. Okay, this is what I call the guideline. So I will grind the metal off up to this point, and then when I'm sanding the filler and blocking it out, I will eventually break through, and I can see right where I'm perfectly level with the undamaged area. I hope you follow that. So I always begin by studying the dent and the damaged area and putting a guideline in. Now you could put the guideline way out here, but you don't want to do that. You don't want to do any more body work than you have to. You don't want to do any more sanding than you have to, because you're just going to add to your work. So my guideline tends to be in fairly close, but I couldn't put it right here, see, because there's a little bit of damage right there. I don't want to be too close. I tend to get anywhere from 1/2 to 1 inch away, and I don't do this either. I follow a nice arc, okay? So I'm gonna say, okay, that looks like the undamaged line there, and we come down, there's a little bit of damage right in there. Most of the dents are right in this area, so I'll come right in here like that. So there's my guideline, just like that, right around the corner here. Actually, I think I'll move it up a little bit, because that's just a scuff of the paint. You follow what I'm doing here? I'm minimizing the amount of work I'm going to have to do, but I'm going to make sure that I am past any damaged area right out into the original curvature of the fender. Once I've marked the guideline, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tape the area on the other side of the guideline. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, Kent, why are you doing that? You're not going to be doing any painting yet. Okay, this is why I do this. When you're sanding, if I'm in here sanding and I go past the guideline and this rough sandpaper scratches this good paint, I'm adding once again to my workload. And when you go to prime it, you could have a possibility of a sand scratch actually showing through your new paint. So I protect the paint beyond my guideline by masking it off, and then if I accidentally sand past that guideline, I'm not going to scratch that good paint. Once again, I'm going to use, I hope you follow what I'm trying to do here. Okay, you might accuse me of being lazy, but man, when it comes to applying body filler and sanding it, I don't want to do any more than I absolutely have to. Plus, I think you'll see later that having a guideline can be a real aid in determining when you have sanded the body filler enough. And we'll get into that probably in the next part when we actually get into sanding, applying and sanding the actual body filler. Okay, now, there you have it. I've got 2 layers of masking tape here. You can see if I accidentally rough this and go beyond, I'm scratching the The masking tape, once again, you don't want to get too carried away. You can break through this masking tape. So it's basically just a little extra protection so I minimize damaging my good paint. You see, when I'm done, I want filler up to this guideline edge. I want it smooth. And when I go to prime it, I don't want any scratches out in my good painted area. Okay, now it's time to abrade the surface. And by abrade, I mean rough it up. Abrasion, that's where the word abrade comes to. And it's really important how you abrade or rough up the surface before the application of the actual body plastic. Last night I spread out some filler. I'm going to show you an example and see if I can show you the difference in types of abrasion and the effect it has on filler. Take a look at what I did last night before I left the shop. I grabbed this piece of metal that had a smooth coating on it, and I took and got my sanding disc, my 36 grit sanding disc, and I abraded or roughed up this section right here. Okay, this is really rough. And then this section here, I just roughed up the paint. I did not remove the paint or the original coating here, and I just roughed this up with Scotch-Brite. You can just barely see it's a little rough. And then over here, I just applied the body filler. Now I've applied there's about a 1/16 of an inch on each one of these three areas. So it's going to be kind of interesting what we find here. But let's go to work and see if we can see any difference between the three and how application is affected by how rough the surface is. Let's start right here with the rough one. Let's try bending this. Okay, I'm going to bend it, and then let's get a putty knife in here. Let's see if we can chip it up. All right, I can chip it. See that? It's not foolproof, but it's taken some effort to chip that filler out on this really rough surface. And if you look, it is leaving a little bit of coating here, so that's pretty good. It's going to take some, real abuse to get the body filler to crack off a rough surface like this. Now let's go over to this area that's just been roughed up with some Scotch-Brite, okay? Now notice here, it also sticks pretty well. This is what's surprising. You think, well, it should obviously stick a lot better. Now let's bend it, see if we can get, oh, look at that. Now let's go back to here, see? So you get a little more crack. Oh, wow, I didn't even get over it. Now once it's cracked, let's see how easy it is to break this off. Still on there pretty good, see that? But let's go over to this area right here where I didn't abrade it at all. Look at that. It just falls off. So I hope this proves a point on how important abrasion is. If you're applying a real thin coat of body filler over paint or primer, Scotch-Brite is probably okay. You maybe don't want to sand through the primer to the bare metal, but it isn't as tough as this abrasion with 36 grit paper here. So those are your options. If I'm working a damaged area like you see over here on this fender, I don't want to leave any of that old paint on there anyway because it's cracked. So I'm going to go ahead and rough up or grind all the old paint completely off like you see here. If you've got a little small door ding or something, you don't necessarily have to grind all the paint off, but you want to at least, as a minimum, abrade it with the heavy-duty Scotch-Brite pads, not the something you buy at the grocery store. So, okay, with this lesson now, let's get back and I'll start grinding away on my fender. I got carried away there. We got that roughed up. Notice how I followed that guideline right around there. And of course I used the wire brush on the drill for that inside edge. So let me back up. Let me back up now and show you a little more detail what we did and some of the little tricks you can use to make sure that you don't have any paint specks or rust specks left in the rough part of this surface. Okay, I took my mask off, dust mask off, because you can't hear me talking. But notice how I rolled this sander up right on the edge where I had to dig into these little rust areas. And if you've got some divots that you can't get into with the sanding disc, one of the things I do is I use a pick. And you come in here with a pick and you can scratch the old paint out of those areas. Rather than sit here and grind away too much metal, use a really sharp pick like this. And you can dig out that old paint, and you can even dig out some of the rust if you've got areas that are so low that the sanding disc can't get to it. But you can use the edge. See that? Get right up on the edge and you can get into some of those areas. So you see I'm all the way out to my guideline here, but I still have this inner edge to do. And as I said earlier, I don't want to come in here with the sanding disc, this heavy sanding disc. There's a lot of ripples in there and it's not going to get the paint off. It's just going to remove a lot of metal on this edge, and I don't want to do that. So now I'm going to put the dust mask back on, the face shield, and we'll get the drill in here and use the wire brush to clean that edge. Okay, now I've got, you see how that brush worked? It got all the paint off along this inside edge, even some of those little rust spots, without taking too much metal off. You can, by the way, you know, if you have just a couple spots here, like right here, you could just use a sanding block and come right up on the edge and just rough those up like that. Say, come out, oh, there's a, if you're concerned about a little area right there that might be rusty, all right, see, I'm digging in there. I'm digging in there into those low spots with the edge of this 36 grit. This is rough. All right, there's another little spot right there. I'll get that out. All right. Once again, just a final check to see if there's any high spots. It's feeling good. Okay, I think we're ready now to kind of clean this up, dust this off, and get ready to mix the first coat of body filler. I'm pretty happy how this has turned out. I think we're ready to apply the filler. I did fail to show you and to mention earlier, one of the things I found on this particular dent, and this is true if you have a dent in a car that's sat for a long time. You got to be really careful. Moisture can creep under the cracked paint and you can actually get rust. I started grinding and I was getting a few rust spots right up in here. And you could have said, well, the paint's okay there, I'll just abrade it with Scotch-Brite pad. Well, boy, that would be a failure, allowing that rust to continue to grow under the original paint. So this is why I prefer, if it's a substantial damage like here, I always prefer to remove all the paint down to the bare metal. That makes, I can make sure I get all the rust out, and then of course I can heat the metal and make sure I get the moisture out. We'll talk more about that in the next part in this series. So that kind of ends this part about prepping the damaged area for body filler. In the next part, we'll actually go through the application and blocking process. So if once again, I encourage you Number one, watch all these parts. I'll be talking about mixing and spreading in the next part, but I won't give the details because I gave all those details in an earlier part in this series about the specifics. This was part 3 where I talk about the tools to use, the options, types of mixing, how to mix properly, and so on. So I highly encourage you, watch all the parts. You're going to miss something, and I'm not going to answer questions if you leave a comment and it's covered in one of the other videos. So, and once again, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel. You'll get the updates on this. Leave your comments, by the way, if you want me to continue this series, or if there's a certain aspect of auto body repair you'd like me to cover in the future. So stay tuned for the next part.